Somebody told me this week that her son is a cloud engineer. I said, "Oh, is that when you switch on the record button on your on your Zoom?" He didn't think it was funny. I still do. Okay, so um, so we are maybe even finishing up Megilas Esther today. And we are in Perek Zion. So just to remember what happened is that at the end of the last Perek, Haman gets home and his head is covered in whatever, and the people are there to collect him to take him to the party at Ahasuerus's palace with Esther, and that's where we start today, which is Perek Zayin. Vayava Hamelach v'Haman, and the king and Haman came l'shtosim Esther Hamalka, to feast with Esther the queen. So Vayomer Hamelach Esther, and the king says to Esther, Gam Bayom Hasheni, also on the second day, B'mishte Hayayin, at this feast with wine, Mash Elasech, what is your quest? What is your request, Esther Hamalka, Esther queen, V'tinasein lach, and I'll give it to you. Uma bakashasech, and what are you pleading for? At Chatzi Hamalchus v'Seash, until half of the kingdom, and I will agree. And we commented before that we're taking notice over here that it uses the words Hamelach rather than Hamelach Achashverosh to remind us that this whole story is happening at a deeper level as well. It's happening at level with Hashem. And Esther is the marshal for the Jewish people. The Maharal explains that this pasuk, that Esther comes to a meeting with the king, with Hashem, and Haman, the prosecutor, is reminding us or alluding to the fact that after a person's lived their lifetime in this world, they will come to a meeting with Hashem and with the Satan. And the Satan is the accuser who will be ratting on us to Hashem, telling Hashem everything that we've done in our lifetime. And we'll be defending ourselves. And Hashem predominantly wants to give us, reward us, help us with going forward. So that's the first or deeper understanding of this pasuk. I think also important to take notice that this is the second day of the party, and the Yidden are fasting, and Esther is eating. Okay, take notice. She b'mishte hayayin, and she's there, and she's having this feast im Esther Hamalka. This feast is together with Esther, the queen. Also important to just as a trivial information. This is all happening on the second day of Pesach. And we have a custom until today to call the lunch on the second day of Pesach, Seudas Esther, the feast of Esther. And there are many people who, so customary to mention it, at least to remind everybody sitting at the Yom Tov lunch that, hey, today is Seudas Esther. It's the day that Esther was feasting together with the king in Shushan. But also there is such a custom to eat triangular things to remind us, to give us to. I always try and figure out how to cut my potatoes into triangles, what triangular things we can make on Pesach with our Pesach customs. Vatan Esther, and Esther answers, and Hamal, the queen, but and she says, if I find favor in your eyes, Hamelach, king, and if it's good by the king, tinasen li nafshi b'she'elasi. I'm asking for that you should give me my soul. That's my request. Va'ami b'vakashasi, and my nation. That's my pleading. So it seems, not all the commentaries agree, but it seems that at this point, Esther tells the king who she is, that she's Jewish. And she explains, she says, Nimkarnu ani va'ami, that I was sold, me and my people, lahashmid laharegu la'abed, to be destroyed. Ve'ilu la'avadim ve'lishvachos nimkonu. If we were just being sold as slaves, hecharashti, I would keep quiet. Ki ein hatzar sheva benezek hamelach, because the pain was not worth bothering the king. So what Esther is saying, that if it was just that we were being sold as slaves, I wouldn't come to you with this big request that you save us, because that, a slave is a slave. It gets sold by money and can get saved by money. But because Haman wants us to be absolutely, totally annihilated, that's why I've got to come and get help from the king. Understanding this at a deeper level, so we spoke before that this is also Hashem saying to Esther, "Ad Chatzia Malchus, I would give you," and that Hashem was telling Esther that the Yidden were not ready yet for Mashiach, and this is Esther's response to Hashem. So Hashem, there are some times where suffering and exile and all of that is actually good for the Yidden. We don't like it, but it brings us to a higher level. It makes us do teshuvah. It connects us more with Hashem. Despite the fact that we don't like it, it's good for us. And when we look at it carefully, we can see the good in it. But says Esther, there are some times where people suffer and it doesn't bring good. It brings them to destruction, to bad space. And this is what Esther is saying to Hashem, so to speak. If you could speak to Hashem like that. If I thought the suffering that the Jews were going through was going to bring them to a good place, I would just keep quiet. I would say, you're right, Hashem, it's not time yet for Mashiach. But what I'm witnessing now, what I'm seeing now happening with the Yidden, this suffering is not bringing them to a good place. This suffering is not making them do teshuvah. This suffering is causing an assimilation, an annihilation. And therefore I turn to you, Hashem, and I say, reconsider, please. And I think it's I think it's a lot of what we're supposed to be saying to Hashem. Now, it's enough. Okay. So the king answers, and he says, Vayem HaMelech Achashverosh, and King Achashverosh answers, Vayemer Esther, he says to Esther Malka, the queen, Mihu Zeva Ezehu, who is this? Asher Mal'a Libai La'asos Chen, who fills his heart to do such a thing. Tamer Esther, and Esther says, Ishtar Oyev, this enemy, this wicked man, Haman hara hazeh, this bad Haman. But Haman niv'as milifnei HaMelech, and Haman started trembling before the king, V'hamalka, and the queen. V'hamelech kam b'chamasai, and the king got up in his anger, b'mishte hayayin, from the feast, el ginas habitan, he went into the garden. V'haman ameid levakesh al nafshay Esther, and Haman stood up to plead for his soul from Esther. Hamalka kira, because he saw ki chalsa elav hara me'es hamelech, that bad was coming to him from the king. So he stood up, and the different commentaries explain the different opinions of what Haman did at this point, but he clearly went to where Esther was. In those days, they lay at the table, didn't sit at the table, and bent down to her to either to plead for his life or to attack her, to harm her, or to make it look like she and him were having their own affair. These are the three different opinions. Melech Shav, Megilas Hapiton, and the king returned from the garden, El Beis Mishte Hayayin, to the feast of wine, V'Haman Neifel al Hamita, and he saw that Haman had fallen on the bed, Asher Esther Alea, that Esther was on it. Vayemer HaMelech, and the king says, Hagam nechvoshes hamalka imi babayis, you want to take my queen here in my house? Hadara yatsa mipi HaMelech, the words went out from the king's mouth, Upnei Haman chafoi, and the face of Haman was covered. So you know that is a sign that somebody is a prisoner. And in most cases, a prisoner before his trial gets his face covered, at least just his eyes. When they cover the whole head, it generally means somebody on death row. Vayemer Charvaina, and all of a sudden Charvaina, this the officers of the king. Echad min hasaris, he's one of the officers of the king. He starts speaking, okay, and he's a man with terribly mixed loyalties. Some of the time he is on Haman's side, some of the time he's on the king's side. But at the end of the Purim story, we say, "V'gam harvena zachulatov." We even remember him fondly with good things because of the times where he was loyal. And what does he come up and say now? Gam hinei ha'etz asher asa Haman leMordechai. Yeah, look, there's the gallows which Haman made for Mordechai, asher diber toivel hamelech, the one who spoke good about the king. Omed beveis Haman, it's standing in the house of Haman, Gavaya Chamishim Amma, 50 Ammas high, Vayemer Hamelech, and the king says, Tzeluhu alav, hang him on it. And the commentaries explain that if Harvana knew about this gallows, which was only built a few hours ago, in the middle of the middle of the night, then he definitely had what to do with it. He was involved in it, and now all of a sudden he realizes that he needs to change loyalties, and so he tells the king. He tells the king about it. The Medrash is kinder to Harvana, and the Medrash says that Eliyahu Navi appeared to Harvana and told him that there's a gallows in Haman's house, and that the gallows come from the wood of the that Shlomo HaMelech imported to use in the Beis HaMikdash, and it's perfectly appropriate for hanging Haman. And so different opinions of however Harvana knows about it. But Yislu as Haman ha'etz, and Haman was hanged on the tree, on the gallows asher hechin Mordechai, which he had prepared for Mordechai. The Chamas hamelech shachacha, and the anger of the king calmed down, it quietened. And almost all the commentaries say this is both kings. Both King Achashverosh calmed down, and the king in heaven, Hashem, calms down also. Perik Ches, Pasuk Aleph, Bayomahu, on that day, Nasan HaMelech Achashverosh leEsther HaMalka, as Beis Haman Tzerer HaYehudim, U'Mordechai ba lifnei HaMelech, ki higida Esther mahu la. So on that day, the king Achashverosh gave Esther Haman's household, and he gave it to Esther. The commentaries explain that he gave it to Esther in front of Haman before he killed him, because he wanted him to die not comfortable with what was going to happen to his family and what was going to happen, or like what had happened with all his fortunes. But Yasser HaMelech Estabata, and the king removed his ring, Asher Evir Haman, which he took from Haman, Vayitna LeMordechai, and he gave it to Mordechai, Vatasem Esther as Mordechai al Beis Haman, and Esther made Mordechai in charge of the household of Haman. In the pasuk where it says that Esther told the king what Mordechai was to her, Rashi comments immediately that she did not say that that Mordechai was her husband, but rather that was her uncle. But Tosef Esther, and Esther continued, and she spoke to the king, Raglav, and she fell before his feet, and she cried, and she pleaded with him, that he should remove all the wickedness of Haman and all the plans that he had for the Jews. And the king put out his golden scepter, Esther, and Esther stood up, and she stood before the king. So it wasn't good enough that Haman was killed, but she wants the Jews to be saved also from this law that's been sent out. But Tamer, and she says, if it's good for the king, if I find favor before him, and the thing is good before the king, and I'm good in his eyes. So I want the king, if I find favor in the king's eyes, I want the king to send out, to retract all the rulings, all the laws that Haman had sent out. How can I be okay? And I see the bad as Ami, which my nation has found. And how can I be okay if I see that my whole birthplace, so to speak, my birth, like those who my nation is destroyed. Vayomer HaMelech Achashverosh Esther, and King Achashverosh says to Esther Malka, Ula Mordechai, and to Mordechai Yehudi the Jew, Hine Beis Haman Nasati Esther, I've given the household of Haman to Esther. For I say Talu al Ha'etz, and I've hanged him on a tree on the gallows, Allah Shalach Yadei Behudim, because he wanted to harm the Jews. And a cute mafresh that I saw explains that um, that all of a sudden Mordechai is here. In the psukim before, Mordechai wasn't there. So how suddenly over here the king says to Esther and to Mordechai, and the commentaries say that when Esther started to cry, Achashverosh called for Mordechai. It's one of the things I always tell brides when I learn with them, that there's one thing men don't know what to do with, and that's a crying wife. And this is what happened. The pasuk says that Esther's crying before the king. Achashverosh has no idea what to do with a crying woman, and so he calls Mordechai for help. I think it's a cute mafresh. The Atem Kisva Yehudim Katov B'nechem. You can write whatever you want about the Jews. B'Shem HaMelech, in the name of the king. V'Chismu B'Tabas HaMelech, and you can sign it with the ring of the king. Ki Chsav Asher Nichtav B'Shem HaMelech, because anything that's been written in the name of the king. V'Nachtam B'Tabas HaMelech Ein Lahashiv. You can't go back on it. And this is the real problem here in the story, because Achashverosh says, I understand what you're telling me, but once something's been written and signed with a king's signet ring, it can't you can't retract it. So you figure out now what you want to write, what you want to say, and you can do it. I allow you to do that. So they called the scribes, and this is in the third month, the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day. And he wrote everything that Mordechai commanded the Jews. There's a Achashtarpanim, V'Hapachat, B'Sarei Medina is Hashem, Mahaydu V'Kush, Sheva V'Esrim Meya Medina, Kichsava V'Am Kilshena, V'El HaYehudim Kichsavam V'Chilshenam. And so they got together the scribes and they wrote to all the different states. Mordechai dictated what they should write. The things just that shout out to us is that, first of all, this happens in Chodesh Sivan, in the month of Sivan. That means 2 months after the story. So it's not like that day on Pesach afternoon this part of the story happens, but this part of the story only happens much later on in the month of Sivan. And the commentaries ask why. Why did Esther wait 2 months before she sent out rules telling the Jews that they could defend themselves? And explains that they didn't want to make King Achashverosh look stupid. That the day that Haman is killed, now they're changing everything that was said. They gave him time to think about it. But even more than that, the commentaries explain that this is how we should behave. When you ask somebody for something and they say yes, you're not likely to get more if, as like they say yes, and then you say, okay, so I also want, so that doesn't generally work. But if you wait a little bit, then you have a much bigger chance of getting what you also want. So she waited 2 months for that, and then they sent out. Mordechai and Esther got scribes, and they sent out to all the different nations, every nation in their own language, and then it specifies that it's sent out to the Jews in their own language, which again reminds us how important Lashon HaKodesh is for us Yidden. Okay. Vayichtav b'Shem HaMelech Achashverosh V'Yachtam B'Tabas HaMelech was written in the name of King Achashverosh. It was signed with the ring of the king. V'Yishlach Svarim Charatzim Basusim Rechve HaRechesh V'Achashtranim B'nei Haramachim, and was sent out to all the riders and the chariots, that the king has given to the Jews, in every city, they could gather, they could defend themselves, they could kill, it's called chel, Medina Hatsarim, that they could, anyone who was gathering against them, Tafanashim Ushlalom Lavais, and they could plunder their possessions if they wanted. The Yom Echad, on one day, Bechol Medinas Hamelech, in all the provinces of the king, B'Shleishasar L'Chedesh Shnei Masar, on the 13th day of the 12th month, Hu Chedesh Adar, which is Adar Pashegan Haksav, Lehinasein Dasan B'chol Medina Medina, and this thing was sent out to every province. Galoi L'chol Ha'amim was made known to all the nations. Liyos HaYehudim Atum, the Jews were allowed to be prepared. Liyom Hazeh, for this day, Lehinokem Oivehem, to take revenge on their enemies. Haratzim Rachwe Harechesh Achash. Chashtronim Yatsu Mevayhalim Udchufim Bidvar Hamelach Vahadas Nitnat B'Shushan Habira. And so the runners and the scribes and everybody, the chariot riders, went very quickly to make this law known everywhere and also in Shushan. Mordechai Yatsa Milifnei HaMelech Bilvush Malchus, and Mordechai walked out from the king's palace in royal clothing. Tcheles V'chur V'ateres Zahav Gedola. So he's wearing all different colors of clothes, which is a whole shirt all by itself, on the various colors and how wearing colors symbolizes happiness, joy, simcha, and most importantly, that the very first color that it mentions over here is tcheles, blue, which symbolizes, it alludes to tzitzis, so that Mordechai is wearing beautiful clothing, and on top of his beautiful clothing, tcheles is put on his tzitzis, saying that with all of this, and I know that I've been made second to the king and all of that, I haven't forgotten that my source is Hashem. And then the famous pasuk which we say out loud, La Yehudim Haisa'ira v'simcha v'sasan v'kar, and the Jews had light and simcha and joy and honor v'kar. The Maharal speaks about what these things are. It points out to us that one of the things that was in the Purim story, different to other miracle stories that have happened to us, is that the Jews were never told that they couldn't do mitzvahs. Like by the Hanukkah story, they weren't allowed to do bris milah. Like there were various other times where we were prohibited from keeping mitzvahs, but they were in such a bad, negative state and so down and depressed that they weren't keeping mitzvahs. So now suddenly that Mordechai is in charge, it says, there was light, and the Maharal says, light is Torah, and simcha, that's gladness, which refers to our yontif, and sason, which is joy, which refers to the mitzvah of bris milah, and yakar, honor, refers to the mitzvah of tefillin. Interestingly, when it speaks about these four things, these are the signs of Jews, that when you want, like however far we wander from keeping Torah mitzvahs, these are things Jews do. They still do bris milah on their boys. They still put on tefillin. They still keep yontif. To whatever extent they do it, but these are the signs of Yidden. Interesting also to take notice, the Maharal points out that in this pasuk over here, where it writes sason, which we translate as joy, it's missing the letter vav. It's written sin, final nun, which we still read as sason, but it's missing a vav, and explains to us that there's no full joy, no complete joy until Mashiach comes. And actually, when it speaks about Mashiach coming, it says sason v'simcha with a vav. Okay, that's what will happen. We will have joy, and we will have happiness, complete joy when Mashiach comes. And so what happens here? I just lost my place. Sorry. V'chol Medina in every province, chol ira in every city, Mekom asher dvar hamelach v'dasei magia, where the words of the king came. Simcha v'sasan leYehudim, there was joy and gladness for the Jews. Mishta v'yantif, there was feasting and holiday. V'rabim amei haaretz misyahadim, and many of the people of the land became Jewish. Ki nafal pachad haYehudim aleihem, because the fear of Jews came on them. So it says that these people were not true, sincere converts. The Megillah tells us they became Jews because they were scared of the other Jews, and Mordechai never accepted them as part of the Jewish nation. And this is one of the sources that we have for dressing up on Purim. Okay, that we should. That they wanted to look Jewish, not to be. They didn't want to be Jewish. Also interesting here that it's over here that the Gemara tells us that Haman's children even converted, and it seems that, well, the ones that weren't hanged, and it seems that they were sincere Jews, and it even tells us that they studied in yeshiva in Bnei Brak. So that connects up very nicely with the Pesach story, where all the rabbis gathered in Bnei Brak to celebrate Pesach. Uvishnei Masar Asar Chedesh Hu Chedesh Adar, and on the 12th day of the month of Adar, B'Shloisha Asar Yom, sorry, on the 12th month, this is Chedesh Adar, B'Shloisha Asar Yom, on the 13th day, Asher Higia Dvar HaMelech V'Dasai Ha'asos B'Yom Asher Sivru Oivei HaYehudim, that the word of the king came that the Jews could do what they wanted, L'Shloit B'Hem, to be the strong ones, and everything turned upside down. This is the main theme of Purim, and this is the main reason we dress up on Purim. We turn upside down, right? We're different. That the Jews ruled over their enemies. Nikalu Yehudim Ba'arei, the Jews gathered in their cities, in all the provinces of the king of Achashverosh. Lishlach Yad B'Mevakshei Ra'asam, they were going to harm those who wanted to do bad to them. But Ishlei Amad Lifneim, no man stood before them. Ki Nafal Pachtam Al Kol Ha'amim, the fear of them fell on all the Jews. V'chol Sarei HaMedinos Dar Panim v'Hapachas v'Eisei Hamlacha Asher Lemelach v'Nasim Es HaYehudim Ki Nafal Pachad Malacha Aleihem. And even all the important people were afraid of Mordechai. Ki Gadol Mordechai b'Beis HaMelech, because Mordechai was great in the household of the king. V'Shamai Heilech B'Chol Medinos, and everyone heard about him in all the different provinces. Ki Ish Mordechai Heilech v'Gadol, that Mordechai was his reputation was getting bigger and bigger. I'm trying to decide what to do now. If I should just hurry up and finish the Megillah in the next 5 minutes, just picking out some of the things, or if I should leave it for this little bit for next week. But do you want to make the decision? I don't know what to do. Okay, I'm gonna try go fast, and I'm gonna go for another 5 minutes. I hope it's okay with everyone. Anyone who needs to leave, obviously. So when it speaks about that Mordechai, his reputation spread, it says that the Gemara points out that there's only 4 people about who it says their reputation spread. Each one of them minted a coin. So Avraham is most famous. It says Gadol, his reputation spread. He made a coin. On one side, it was a thing of an emblem of an old man. On the other side, a young man. Yehoshua also made a coin. It says about him also that his reputation spread, and he did an ox on one side and a re'im, which we're not sure 100% what it is, a different kind of animal on the other side. David HaMelech also minted a coin when his reputation spread, and he did a stick with a knapsack on the one side, and the Tower of David, Migdal David on the other side. And here we have Mordechai, and it says that he minted a coin that on one side it had sackcloth and ashes, and on the other side he had a golden crown. So the next little psukim, I'm not going to read inside. As I said, I'm going to just go fast. I'm going to point out a few things to anyone who's following. So everybody, now lots of people get killed, and then it lists for us that Haman was hanged and his sons, and you probably remember from the reading of the Megillah that they read the names of Haman's sons. The person who's reading tries to do it in one breath to point out to us that it wasn't worth more than a breath, and that they were all killed. They were all killed at once. It then tells us that all of this is written in down by Esther, And it also, all of a sudden, so it tells the people, Niskarim, that they were going to, it was written down as a Megillah, and it was declared that this holiday would be kept every single year. It points out that every year, and apparently when Mashiach comes, we will still keep Purim. But it points out as every year the way that they celebrated was by recording the story, by feasting, and by mishloach manos. It's one of my I don't know if it's pet peeves when I hear the girls at school say we don't do shalach manos, okay, because we don't need jelly tots or fizzers, and I always try and tell them that it's not the jelly tots and the fizzers. It's the fact that when we give each other things, we foster care and love between each other. And it's one of the mitzvahs of Purim, as well as Matanos Le'Avyonim, making sure that the poor people are taken care of. Also pointing out to you that if you do have a Megillah in front of you and you see the list of the names of Haman's sons, you will see that in the very first name, Parshan Dasa, there's a small little tuf. In the name of, in Pasuk Tes, where it's the name Par Mashta, it's got a little shin. And in the last name, Vaizasa, it's got a little Zion. This is going to answer a question why suddenly, in the new few psukim down, it says that and the sons of Haman, the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. They said, hey, we just learned that a page ago that the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. And my mother actually showed me this and gave me this article. She said that Taf Shin Zayin, which are those 3 little letters, stands for a year, Taf Shin Zayin, which is the year 1946. And she gave me this piece of paper, which is a photocopy of it's a photocopy of the Newsweek of October the 28th, 1946, where the Newsweek is talking about foreign affairs, and it's telling the story of the 10 Nazis, the last 10 Nazis who were hanged for what they had done, and it says that there was only one of the 10 who resisted. The other 9 of them went to their deaths. They were led and they were hanged. And Julius Streicher, he had to be pushed and dragged and across the floor. He was wild and he was screaming "Hail Hitler!" And then his final words when he was hanged was he shouted "Purim Fest 1946." So fascinating, that whatever you can understand it as however you want. And the very last chapter, Perek Yud, of the Megillah, it says, "Vayasim Hamelech Achashverosh Masa Haaretz," and King Achashverosh put a tax on the land, the Iyayam, and on all his other provinces, V'chol Maasei Takvoi, Gurasoi, Farasha, Gedulas, Marachai Asher, Godlu Hamelech, Haleihem Ksuvim al Sefer Divrei Hayamim. Everything is written in Divrei Hayamim, the Malchei Madai U Paras, to the kings of Madai and Paras. And almost all of the commentaries ask, what is this about? This last 3 psukim, a whole new perek. It should have, the end of the Megillah should have been once everybody is hanged and the Jews are safe. That should have been the end of the Megillah. So what's this little bit that seems to be an afterthought that doesn't seem to really have anything to do with the story of Purim? And the commentaries explain to us that this is the story of Purim, that the story of Purim can look so completely natural that nobody realizes, nobody sees the miracle. It started off with a king who was making a party. It ends with a king who's making a tax. It doesn't you don't have to include God at all in this story unless you want to. That's the story of Purim. You don't have to include God in your life unless you want to. And Rav Bachrach explains, he says that in Tehillim, we say, Hashem, I called on you in my time of trouble, and you answered me. And he continues, he says, Achein atakel mistater, even though you are a hidden God, you are also, Aval kel Mashiach, you're a God who saves. And why do we read this Purim story? And why do we read it year after year after year? Because we have to choose to find God in our lives. We can see our lives with God and we can see our lives without God. And our job is to see God in our lives and to know that just as in the story of Purim, where people thought that it was just an ordinary story that's going on with a bad guy and a good guy and and whatever, and a bad wicked king and a beautiful queen, and that's how we could look at the stories of our lives. Or we could look at the life that we're living and we could say, somewhere under there, there's a Mordechai and there's an Esther and there's a Geula that's busy brewing, and please God is going to happen. And if we do feel that and we can figure that out in our lives, we should very soon be able to say, which is what we are waiting for. And that's Chazak Chazak. We have finished the Megillah, that last part, very fast. And we will resume learning Tehillim next week, please God. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful, Rivki. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you, Rivki. I still think you might need to go over it before Purim next year.
Okay. For anyone who wants, and maybe the last part a little bit slower.
Yeah.